Welcome to LinkedIn Live and Leading with Gratitude Live here on the Methods Network. I'm your host, Chester Elton, the Apostle of Appreciation, coming to you from the Gratitude Epicenter of the Planet Summit, New Jersey. We say give us 30 minutes, we'll give you great information, great inspiration, and a roadmap to create a culture of gratitude where you work and in your home. It's all brought to you on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube by the wonderful people that produce all this stuff at the Methods Network. Well, I'm really excited to introduce you our guest for today. He's my new friend. His name's Elton Gannett. Now, let me tell you just a little bit about Elton. Elton Gannett was the founder and CEO of TrackMaven, a marketing analytics platform whose clients include Microsoft, Marriott, Saks Fifth Avenue, Home Depot, Aetna, Honda, and GE, to name a few. In 2018, it merged with Skyward, the leading content marketing platform. He has been on the 30 under 30 list for both Inc. and Forbes. He is a contributor to fastcompany.com, and his book, The Creative Curve, came out in June of 2018 from Currency, a division of Penguin Random House. The book has been featured on the CNBC, Forbes, numerous top podcasts, and has been picked up and translated into 7 other languages by 2019. Most importantly, he was once a very pitiful runner-up on Wheel of Fortune. We'll get more into that a little later. So I'm excited to introduce you to my new friend, Elton Gannett. Welcome to the show, Elton.
Thanks for having me, man. You gave all my dirty laundry right at the top, so there's no more secrets to know. I'm good,
Yeah, it's great. I was on your live show and we got to be friends. And I have to tell you, for everybody that's tuning in, creative, fun, engaging. If you ever have a chance to find him on his TEDx talk or get his book, The Creative Curve, treat yourself. It's time well spent. Well, listen, we're going to have a lot of fun today. And, put your questions in the chat box. Ask Elton anything you want about creativity. We're really going to get into the science of creativity. And so I want to start things off by asking, so what is it that caused you to write the book, The Creativity Curve?
Yeah, so the idea of the book is really, looking at this question of, can we learn to become more creative? And it spawned out of an experience I had where I was running this marketing technology company that we gathered data. And so we had all this data on what stories, what things were resonating with consumers. And what we found is that there's actually a lot of patterns to what was resonating. But yet when you talk to marketers, when you talk to people in creative fields, often they say, oh, there's no pattern to creativity. I wasn't born with it. Or, it's too late for me to learn those skills. You either have it or you don't. And I was looking at all this data and I was like, that's not true. Like, this stuff's learnable. And so I sort of got really interested in this question of, what is creativity? How do we think about it? What's right and wrong about that? And how can we actually learn to be more creative? And so I interviewed 25 living creative greats, ranging from Oscar winners to Tony Award winners to billionaires, Michelin star chefs, like a whole wide range of stuff. And the book is sort of part myth busting, part sort of how-to guide.
Yeah, so you talk about creativity can be learned. And I love that it's a skill. Right? So what are some of the first steps on learning to be creative?
Yeah. So in the book, I break down these 4 patterns I found that all of the creative achievers I talked to did. And there's a wide variety of stuff, but one of the first ones, and one of the ones that I think is really accessible to people, is that we think of creatives as almost an opposition to consumers. Like, creators do, consumers consume, active, passive. And what I think is interesting is that actually when you talk to creatives, what you find is that one of the things that's key to their success is actually consumption. The best jazz musicians are huge, voracious consumers of jazz. In the book, I tell the story of Ted Sarandos, who's the chief content officer of Netflix for the last 20 years. And he actually started his career in the entertainment business as a clerk at a video rental store who decided to watch every single movie in the store. And the reason why this consumption is so important is twofold. One, if you want to have ideas, right? If you want to connect the dots, you have to have the dots to connect. So we can talk more about the science of it, but your brain is actually really good at connecting ideas together, but they have to be in there. The second reason why is that a huge part of creativity isn't actually the skill or the craft, but it's timing. is this the right idea at the right time? And we can talk more about that all day. But one of the key things, if you want to nail timing, is, well, you have to know what else is out there. And so consumption, I think, is probably the most accessible and really the first step for a lot of creatives if you want to enhance your creativity.
You know, you created this great little video about Isaac Newton, and I love that. You know, say, you know, this myth that this apple fell on his head, and all of a sudden he figured out that gravity was a thing. Talk to me about this myth of the solo genius, that somehow just out of the blue, these people were struck by lightning and became these amazing, you know, characters in our history. You debunk that so well.
Thanks. Well, I think what's so interesting is we have these myths around creativity, and you know, there's a few. I mean, one of them is the sort of the inspiration theory of creativity, which is that, you know, creativity just strikes certain people and you can't really wrangle it. And we sort of talk about these stories like Isaac Newton being hit on the head with an apple and having the idea for all this stuff. But what's interesting is that actually creativity all happens in the right hemisphere of our brain. And the right hemisphere is where we do metaphorical processing, where we connect sort of distant ideas together. It's where we would disentangle wordplay. But all of the work that your right hemisphere does is actually like right below the level of consciousness. And what happens is that your right hemisphere only sort of says, hey, I got an idea, when there's something that sort of strikes it and sort of prompts that idea to come sort of to the forefront. And so this is why, for example, the Isaac Newton example, the apple hit him, right? And it triggered all these ideas that were percolating in there already, right? Isaac Newton had been studying physics for years, right? He wasn't like some non-scientist guy, like he was a scientist. And so, yeah, of course he had that idea, but if he hadn't been doing the work, if he hadn't been studying, his right hemisphere wouldn't have connected the dots in that way. So it's really important to understand that inspiration, aha moments, flashes of genius, like that's not mysticism, that's just biology. And then the second myth that I think is really important is we think a lot about the idea of like, what is a creative? And often we get confused between the sort of like PR marketing version of a creative and the reality, right? So think about Steve Jobs, for example. Steve Jobs is sort of held up as this like solo genius. He was sort of rolling the boulder up the hill all by himself. But like the reality is literally on day one, he had Steve Wozniak because he knew he actually wasn't a great engineer. So he needed to have someone to help him with those things. They actually raised venture capital very early and had hired multiple people. And so what you find when you look closer at the stories of solo geniuses and these creative geniuses, what you find over and over and over again is that they're part of a form of a creative community. And so that's something I talk about in the book, is this idea of like, if you want to be creative, you have to build a creative community around yourself to help you actually take action.
So expand on the creative community, because it's really interesting. Well, one of the stories you tell that I just love, because I'm a huge Beatles fan, right, is Paul McCartney, that he'd immersed himself in music, and then he connected the dots for one of the most recorded song in history, which is Yesterday. So talk to me about, that's a combination of consuming massive amounts of music, right? Surrounding himself with all kinds of musicians. And then that epiphany moment where he came up with the song Yesterday. Of course, you tell the story so much better. So please.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great example of the creation of the song Yesterday is actually this sort of like iconic story in sort of academic research around creativity. There's actually academic books all about this story. And it's sort of interesting because, right, it was this huge success. And how the story goes is he literally was like sleeping in one day. He had like a late night the night before. And he like woke up and he had dreamed right at the end of his sleep this melody, which was the melody for Yesterday. And it sort of stands on one end as this story of, wow, look at this sort of lightning bolt moment of inspiration. But actually, it's very different. actually what happened is that for almost 2 years after that, Paul McCartney sort of labored on that melody and actually adding things like the lyrics, adding the rest of the verses and the choruses. He would go to his friend's house to practice this and play this. He worked with producers and engineers. And so what you see when you see that story sort of in a more macro light is that actually that's the story of a lot of hard work, of bringing resources in from other people, of being really thoughtful. And even more importantly, again, to that point around consumption, the melody for Yesterday is sort of a reconfigured Chuck Berry melody, which is Paul McCartney was a huge fan of. And so again, that idea of consumption is a huge part of this. So I love the story because I think on one end it seems like such a simple answer, but actually when you start to peel back the layers, you see that actually no, like that's a much more complex origin than I think we'd like to believe.
Yeah, I love the original lyrics too, as he was singing his scrambled eggs. So how I love my scrambled eggs. Listen, we have got Justin LeVere in the question command center. So I know there's a lot of questions coming in. Let's flash to him and see if we can stump our guest. Justin, the time is yours in your ninja outfit,
Excellent.
Which I always love.
Good to have you on the show. Loving the conversation about creativity. Definitely creative myself.
By the way, Justin, like you are winning the lighting game. We should all go be wherever Justin is.
Thank you. It helps. Well, we run a live production studio company, so we do a live production.
That'll do it.
Chester's show. So we definitely have experience now. Thanks for the compliment. So first question comes from Travis Byrne from Fredericksburg, Texas. And so he wants to know, if I really want to be creative, what's the first step?
Yeah, so I think when you want to start any creative process, I really think creativity is the combination of three unique skills. One is the craft, right? So the actual ability to paint, for example. The second is timing, right? Are you able to figure out what's the right idea at the right time? And the third is marketing and PR. And so I think sort of it's the craft one is very obvious to us. But I actually think a great place to start is learning about timing, right? Where are ideas sort of on the trend curve in your industry? What's familiar? What's different? And that all goes back to consumption. So the rule of thumb I like to give people is you should actually be spending about 20% of your waking hours consuming content in your vertical. And that's not like going on Twitter, right? That's not learning a little bit about a lot of things. That's going very, very deep in one specific thing and just sort of going rabbit on it. And it feels sort of weird, right? Because so much that the conversation around creativity is about doing, right? It's about outputs. But actually, when you interview famous creatives, what they'll tell you is like, okay, they wrote a book and they took a year off. But in the meantime, they kept reading, right? Same with musicians, right? And so I think we spend way too much time when we sort of talk about creativity, talking about the output and the productivity. And we just spend a lot more time and a lot more of our own creative time on the inputs.
Excellent. Talk a little bit more about the creative community. I know we've got probably some questions about that, Justin.
Yeah, we do actually. So Sally actually wrote in, Sally Gandara from Colorado Springs, Colorado. Hi, Sally. She says, I'm not well connected. How can I reach out to people to be a part of my creative community?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So first of all, when I think about a creative community, I split it into 4 key characters that I think are really important to know. So the first one is a master teacher. So a master teacher is someone who's achieved world-class excellence at the craft. They might not necessarily be famous, but world-class at the craft. Who teaches you the craft. That's the first part of your creative community. The second one is what I call a conflicting collaborator. So these are people who you work with, you collaborate with, but instead of people who are sort of similar to you or you gel with, these are people who are really good at your weaknesses, right? They're different than you. And bringing that together allows you to actually fix your weaknesses and actually achieve more, right? And there's a big self-awareness thing in there we can get into. The third thing is what I call a modern muse. And so these are people who inspire you, who motivate you, who provide the emotional backbone for creativity. A lot of times these are other people in your creative field, right? So like stand-up comedians have a lot of stand-up comedian friends because it provides that emotional support. They get it. There's a little bit of friendly competition, but that emotional push, which is so important when it comes to creativity. And then fourth and finally is what I call a prominent promoter. And this is someone who's already well established in their field. They're famous, is a way to put it. And they lend you their credibility. And this is really important because, again, creativity is craft, it's timing, and it's marketing/PR. So the third element is really about getting heard. And if you want to get heard, you have to have someone else who's already in the arena who sort of says, hey, listen to this person. So in music, we see this with bands having opening acts on tours, with books, right? Authors blurb other authors' books. With startups, you have a board of advisors or directors. So that idea of lending your credibility is really important. So to the question of, well, how do you get these people to actually talk to you? I think there's two things. One, you get really good in this day and age at sending a cold email, right? And sort of learning like how to write an email that's clear, concise, compelling. That stuff is really important. I have a guide. If you go to thecreativecurve.com/resources, that's just free. You don't have to enter an email or anything, that has some templates of how to do that. And then the second one, and this one I think is a little like some people disagree, is you got to move, right? Like if you want to succeed in art, for example, you have to be in New York, Paris, London, Milan. If you want to, be a screenwriter, like you have to be in LA or New York. If you want to do country music, you have to be in Nashville. And the reason why is that so much of the community building process happens kind of by accident, right? You go to a party, you overhear someone in a coffee shop, you're hanging out with a friend in the industry who brings another friend in the industry. And so there's something about being physically there that is unreplaceable online, that I think is still really essential.
That's so interesting. You talk about reaching out and making sure, I found that when you do reach out to people, and particularly, in our space, we're authors, right? You reach out to other authors. I'm always amazed at how gracious they are and how willing they are to help. Yeah, it's so funny. We think, they're really busy and so on and so on. I'm always amazed at a simple little email. Hey, I've written a book on something. I was wondering if you'd take a look. Do you have any advice for me? It's interesting to me that like 8 times out of 10, those people will reach back because they've been where you've been. Have you found that to be true?
Yeah, they're empathetic, right? They get it. They know what it's like to write your first book and need your first blurb, right? And when I first book, I was amazed by authors who were willing to like read the book and blurb it, and like I was some of them didn't even know me. I just sort of reached out to them, and that sort of kindness is actually, I think, one of the really exciting things about working in a creative field is that people get it, right? They get it.
Yeah. By the way, I was so impressed. You're great about networking, reaching out to people. As I was looking at your book online, 453 reviews of your book with a 4.9 rating. I mean, that's ridiculous. So, clearly knows how to network. Justin, do we have any other questions in the command center?
Yeah, we've got an interesting one here from Phyllis Knight in New York, is actually asking, Alan, which one are you? You talked about 4 different types, prominent promoter, modern muse, and such. Are you that person to anybody else? And if so, which one?
Yeah, so what's interesting about those roles is that people can play multiple of those. Sometimes one person is both your master teacher and your prominent promoter. In the case, for example, some of the sort of like really famous songwriters and producers that exist in sort of the pop songwriting world. But more often than not, people play different roles for you. And even as a person, you might play different roles for other people, right? So there's startups I'm involved in where like, I guess, they think I'm being helpful. But, I'm sort of on their board of advisors or things like that. And then there's other people who are, working on books, for example, and I'm the person they call for advice on, marketing it or how to do research, right? And so I think it really just depends on who the person is and what their needs are. But what's interesting, and one of the things I talk about in the book, is that so often when we talk about these relationships, and they kind of are a metaphor for mentoring. I have some issues with the mentoring word just because it feels overly formal to me. But when we talk about mentoring, we talk a lot about one direction of it, which is the person receiving. But the thing that's interesting when you actually look at the research is that one of the things that leads people to have long creative careers is exposure to people with fresh ideas, exposure to young people, exposure to more experimental ideas. And so what you find is that actually the people who have been in their careers and had these long successful careers often also constantly are surrounding themselves with people who are earlier in their careers, helping them, mentoring them, because it gives them exposure to new ideas. So the idea of sort of reverse mentorship, I think, is really important for people if they want to have careers that have longevity.
I think that comes back to the empathy that creatives have. Is you're right. They're eager to reach out. They're eager to help because they want to know what you're working on. Like, what are some new and fresh ideas, right?
Totally. I mean, I think about with like startups, for example, like a lot of what's fun about, doing angel investing or advising is like seeing sort of what's out there, right? And sort of being in that flow of information of like what is emerging. And that helps me then make better decisions about startups I want to do or things I want to work on. And so that idea of sort of learning from helping others is actually, I think, really fundamental.
Excellent. So talk to me about why creativity is more important now than ever, particularly with the advent of like AI.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's crazy, right? We're going through this time where like there's all these white collar jobs that people went to high school and college and were told, learn this skill and you'll be set for life. And those jobs are being automated away by software that's getting increasingly smart, is able to handle complex tasks. Like you're seeing, for example, in the law industry, a lot of sort of legal jobs that are now being able to be done by machine learning. Like that's kind of scary. And what's interesting is that the antidote to that is really, creative professions, right? Like creativity is the thing that AI struggles with the most. There was in 2018, there was a survey done by LinkedIn that found that actually creativity was the number one soft skill in demand by employers. And I don't actually think creativity is a soft skill. I think it's a hard skill, but just the fact that employers actually are acknowledging this, I think is a really important thing for us to think about when we're planning our own learning and development.
See, that's why I think your book is so important, Alan, because creativity can be learned. It is a hard skill. And if it's the number one sought after skill in job searches, then it behooves all of us to make sure that we know how to develop those skills. So again, I can't recommend your book enough. Well, listen, we always like to give people these practical tools. Okay. So we say, what are 3 tips that you would give people on this journey to developing their creativity hard skills? What would they be?
Yeah. So I think number 1 is create a mindset of self-awareness, because I think so much of these things we're talking about come to how well do you know yourself? How well do you know your weaknesses? How well do you know where you need to learn more, right? So figure out how you can build a mindset of self-awareness for yourself. And a lot of times that comes down to sort of psychological safety, having a support network. I think that's number 1. Number 2 is start with consumption. Consumption is readily accessible. It's often free. And so go really deep into consumption like we talked about. And by the way, when I say consumption, one thing that's important is that it's not about reading like other people's synthesis of their own consumption. It's about doing your own synthesis. So you have to go and read primary sources, right? Like if you, for example, are in startups, and you want to be working on cryptocurrency, right? Don't go read blog articles about other people's analysis of cryptocurrency. Go read the technical white papers for how cryptocurrency works. Like that's the real consumption that you're talking about. And then the third and final really practical thing is think about your location and be honest with yourself. Can you have a thriving creative career where you are? And if not, really be honest that you might have to move.
Yeah, you got to be flexible, right? That's part of the creative process. I love the way you make it so simple. If you're in music, if you want to be in country music, it's Nashville, right? If you want to be in screenwriting, it's LA, it's New York. I might add Vancouver, Canada, just because that's where I'm from. And I know there's a lot of movies out there. To your point, be flexible. Well, the show is called Leading with Gratitude. And so we always love to ask our guests, we've got a wonderful campaign, #FindYourGratitude. So I want to ask you the question today, where did you find your gratitude?
Today I received an email from an old friend who I hadn't talked to in a very, very long time. And he just had sort of out of the blue reached out and offered to help me with something that he sort of knew I would want his help on. And I just, that was something I was very grateful for. It's just this idea of like sort of friendship as a long-term institution. And, sometimes we don't always tend to it perfectly, but I think when you have sort of, true friends, you have that long-lasting thing. I'm grateful for that.
And one question I want to ask before we wrap up, and I get asked this when we write books as well. Was there a part of your book that was just like the favorite part of your book? Like, was there somebody that you interviewed or a story you came across that just was, I know it's like asking which of your children do you love the most. Is there one story that really stands out? And then we'll wrap up.
I spent a day with the flavor team at Ben & Jerry's up in Vermont. And like, that was just, so fun. Like they have this sort of food lab, and they were showing me how they come up with, new ice cream flavors. And it actually is a really interesting from the creative process, what they do. Like there's a lot of things they do in terms of building psychological safety, but like, other than that, it was just like fun to like eat ice cream and toppings. One thing, by the way, really interesting, if you have Ben & Jerry's, like the cookie is like soft and chewy in the ice cream. But before they put in, it's really hard because it absorbs the moisture from the ice cream. So when you try and eat the cookie bits in the lab, they do not taste good. That's what I learned.
A little insight into Ben & Jerry's, and I love Ben & Jerry's.
Exactly.
Cherry Garcia. Yeah. Listen, Alan, you don't just listen. Where can we find more about you and people want to discover more about how to be creative? Where do they go?
Sure. You can go to allen.xyz. That's ALLEN.xyz. And there's newsletter, link to the book, resources, all sorts of fun stuff.
Great. And by the way, if you want to view this show or any of our shows, you can go to Methods of, where it's all housed. And we also broadcast on Marshall Goldsmith's channel, so you can go see all his past episodes as well. Well, listen, you never disappoint, Alan. I'm always enriched. I always feel more creative after I talk to you. And again, if you are looking to develop that hard skill of creativity, there is only one book you should buy. It's The Creative Curve. It's available on Amazon and fine bookstores everywhere. Thank you so much, Alan.
Thanks, Chester.
Well, great. Well, listen, we've got more great shows coming up. In fact, our next show, we're going to welcome Jacob Morgan. Now, Jacob has written this wonderful book called The Future Leader, and he is a futurist. He's going to teach us how to be a futurist, how to look around those corners. This is his book right here. I want to give you a quick heads up. He's got some fascinating ways for you to take a look at where things are going and how you can best be prepared as a leader. Well, I want to say thank you to Justin Levere in our Question Command Center. Wave to the crowd there for doing such a great job again. And a shout out to the world's greatest online production producer ever in Brent Klein. He makes it all work. Love the orange beanie. And of course, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, our Harper Business Books, who sponsored our book, Leading with Gratitude. Alan Mullally said, I love this book, and a not so subtle message. Buy me, buy me, buy me. Well, great. Well, listen, it's been great to be with you here today. I'm grateful for our time together. Join us every Tuesday and Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, same bat time, same bat channel for great information, great inspiration, and a roadmap to create a culture of gratitude where you work and where you live. And through this COVID and through any kind of hard time you're going through, I hope three things happen. I hope that you become more grateful. I hope that you become more kind. And I hope you become more patient with each other. Well, that's our story. We're sticking to it. See you again soon. Grateful for our time together. Take care. Cheers.